wait until the red light comes on. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin our meeting tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. And I've asked Commissioner Hunt to give us a prayer thought today, so I will turn the time over to him.
Yeah, thank you. I might have two quotes I want to share. I'll just start with those, I guess. It says, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." And that's by Helen Keller. And then, "No one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it." That's by Howard Edward. I just kind of like those. I think that they kind of reflect a little bit about how we can be as a commission, that one person's voice, while it means a lot, if we act together, we can really accomplish some great things. And I'm just glad to be here with you guys and hope that we can make things successful together and serve the community as best as possible. So that's it.
I really like that thought. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, moving right along, first item on our agenda, we are being asked to consider the proposed conditional use permit for Adventure Time Sales, which is a vehicle sales use to be located at 1140 West, 725 North, and we'll turn the time over to our one remaining member of staff since we lost Cassie.
Planning staff, right? Please.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've been planning staff, that's true. Planning staff. Sorry. We love y'all. I'm really bummed that we lost Cassie.
Yeah, it was a rough afternoon, losing our planner. But thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. As indicated, this is a request for a conditional use permit for vehicle sales. This was Cassie's last project, so we'll do it in memoriam for her, whether she appreciates that or not. But as you've seen in the past in our industrial zones on the west side of the city, often there are small dealerships, custom cars, limited sales, things of that nature. And under the state requirements, if you're familiar with them, to obtain a dealer's license, you have to have a location. You usually typically have to have 3 places for display of the vehicles and then a display of your dealer's license. The applicant is requesting a limited area or a small vehicle sales use at 1140 West, 725 North in Suite D. This is fairly typical as we see on the west side. There is flex spaces that are available for rent or use, and this Suite D is the area Mr. Is it Dorrance, right? Correct. Mr. Dorrance would like to do the sales. Now, my understanding in working with Cassie and bringing myself up to speed, this is a operation that will seek cars out for clients. It's not necessarily one where you just have a bunch of cars available for sale, as you typically see with the sales use. So the plan is to use the suite. They have the typical parking in a flex space area that they share. They lease a certain amount of stalls for their suite. But they also have the flex space on the inside, and my understanding is that any cars that are sought and brought into the site, they'll use that flex space for. So this will be all interior. We do have another business that does a very similar thing and uses the interior flex space for the storage of the cars and what's needed to prep them for delivering to the client. So as we looked at the permit, you look for those impacts. They're not impacting the parking. There's no additional noise and odor of that nature associated with this proposal. And so planning staff is recommending approval, and we outlined 5 conditions. It's recognizing that this is the auto sales for that particular suite. Also, the display as required by the state of Utah in compliance with their provisions. But if they use the display for vehicles, it'll be inside in this case. And then one thing that we have typically done with vehicle sales on a conditional use permit in the past, the city, when you have a dealer that can process a lot of cars, it doesn't look like in this case, that they not bring them in for the transport trucks, often in these small suites, parking, turning around for the transport trucks, unloading them. They often just stay out in the street and block traffic. And so we've consistently recommended condition 5 in our past, and so we've kept that behavior in the conditional use permit in this case. So we're recommending approval at this time, given those conditions.
Thank you very much, Corey. Any questions for staff?
I have one quick question, Corey. Condition number 5, is that, I know what you're saying there, but is that condition clear enough to accomplish what you're looking for? Because wouldn't any truck for hire to be a commercial transport truck? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess you can. I guess you could tighten that down with the vehicle transport truck, because that's the type of truck we're looking at. Our industrial area do allow trucks, but with this particular use associated with vehicles, we're trying to eliminate that truck that transfers the vehicles.
Yeah, right, I understand what you're trying to do. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't inadvertently make it so that a single flatbed truck with a single vehicle on the back of it that comes in, and even whatever backs in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Accommodate a flatbed truck rather than the transport truck. And
yeah.
We've used transport truck because that's what we've learned that they call those vehicle transport trucks. But you're right, it could be interpreted a flatbed, and I don't think that's the intention.
Right, and that's part of my question, is just to make sure that we're saying what we mean so that we don't cause undue.
Good point. We probably ought to tighten up that language to mean the multiple vehicles.
Yeah, I Googled it. Car carrier trailer is a term that I think is used. So we could replace it with car carrier trailer. That's what you're talking about. Would they stack a bunch of cars on there?
Yeah, again, I think it was back to that argument. Does that include a car carrier trailer that's pulled by a F-350? Not that I'm endorsing F-350s, but versus one that's your heavier truck.
Well, what if we limited it to from a commercial transport truck that carries 2 or more vehicles, right? That would open it up for one single one to come through.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have that discussion with the applicant, because I think their intention in past discussions is not intending to go that direction.
Yeah. Kevin, you raise a good point, though. I mean, that could theoretically prohibit them from having a tow truck.
Yeah.
Pull a single car in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's what it would be intended to, and I doubt that we would enforce it that way, but it's good to be precise.
Well, in this case, I'm thinking down the road, Corey's decided to retire, Lisa's retired, and something happens, right? And now we got this nitty-gritty whatever, and just trying to avoid potential future problems.
We'll have very good minutes.
I like Commissioner Daylor's positive thinking.
That you're going to retire.
Right. Moving right along. Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. If you'll just take either podium, whichever one strikes your fancy. Just introduce yourself for us.
Hello, I'm Martin Dorrance. I'm the applicant and the owner of the business.
Okay. Any concerns or anything that you want to say with regard to your application?
Corey and Cassie did a great job.
Okay.
As we met with them and talked about what we were planning on doing, it was much easier to go through the process and understand what they wanted. So Corey did a great job explaining it. And the transport is actually right on. Yeah, you don't want to have big transports driving down those streets.
Any questions for the applicant?
Are you comfortable if we limited that language to 2 or more, transport that carries 2 or more?
Absolutely comfortable with that.
Okay, great.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Corey, if it's one, I mean, if it's prohibited 2 or more, if it's one, is that going to cause a problem with any of the other business owners in the area?
You know, if it's your flatbed style truck, I don't think it'll cause a problem. If it's one vehicle on a multi-car trailer, then you'll probably have some
Okay, all right.
issues.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to step forward. Seeing no one step forward, we'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff? Any further discussion or debate?
Just a comment on that. In order to avoid, if we just say that carries 2 or more, I don't want them bringing in one of these really large trucks with one. So if we say maybe
Designed
that,
to
yeah,
carry?
designed or has the capacity to
Yeah.
carry 2 or more.
Yeah.
So what if we change that then to read the loading and unloading of vehicles for sale from a commercial transport truck designed and/or with capacity to carry 2 or more vehicles is prohibited? Does that work?
Yeah, and I like the addition of commercial vehicle transport truck.
Commercial
I think that
vehicle?
also limits it.
Okay.
And did we change the V on C to 3?
The what? Say that
So
again?
on,
It says
Under
3
C.
instead of 3. They
Oh.
suggested.
that's important.
That's Kathy
Cat.
Helgeson, attention to
right
detail
there.
right there, yeah. That's good.
Okay. The chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to approve the conditional use permit request for Adventure Time Sales at 1140 West, 725 North, Suite D, subject to the following 1 through 4 in the staff report, with number 5 to read the loading and unloading of vehicles for sale from a commercial vehicle transport truck with the capacity of 2 or more vehicles is prohibited. And the reasons for the action, A through D, with the correction in C, changing the word at the end from the to 3.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? If not, we'll start with you, Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
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 Great. Motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda. The second item, we're being asked to consider the final subdivision application for Barris Cove, which is a single-family subdivision with 13 lots, 4 of which are existing, 9 of which are new, located at 196 East Chase Lane. So we'll turn the time back over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. The commission is a recommending body at this point in time. We're achieving an application for the end process in preparation of the plat going to the city council for their review and acceptance. Overall, in the staff report, you'll see that we believe most of the items have been addressed, and the construction plans have changed in comments to the Development Review Committee. We do mention just a couple of tie-up things. I believe it's there, but scaling the electronic is a little bit more difficult to figure out some distances. So the example is on the RL zone, the lot frontage is 40 feet. Particularly, it allows the wedge shape for a cul-de-sac lot. But when you achieve the 25-foot setback depth, it should be to 60 feet. And we just bring up a verification that we scale those lots, because they're around, a couple of them are down into the 40-foot range. And so we just want to make sure that the setback at the 60-foot, or at the setback of 25 foot, the 60-foot width exists. That we believe it does, but we're not able to verify that. And I think another issue we bring up is just the addressing. Our city public works director is in charge of the addressing. Typically, the developer looks around and assigns the addresses, and he just verifies them. There is a east and west and a north and south odds and evens in different quadrants of the city, but just have him work with the public works director. I don't recall from memory the other items, but we think they're minor in detail, so we recommended you consider moving this up to the city council with those conditions of approval.
Thank you very much. Any questions for staff?
Where I designed the site, do I just abstain from everything? Or
Oh,
from-
were you part of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, then
I'm the
we'll,
engineer on this.
I didn't realize that. So we'll just,
Okay.
we'll invite you to step down while we consider this matter,
So-
and then we'll invite you back up. Does that work, Lisa?
Yeah, and just for the record, if you could just recuse yourself and explain what the conflict is, yes, and then step down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm part of the engineering team that worked on the subdivision and the civil design on this, so I'll just step down and let you guys take over, so, for a bit.
Thank you, you're accused. All right, any questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. And if you'll just introduce yourselves to us for the record.
Jody Barris.
I'm Kyle Honeycutt, their consultant.
Great. Any concerns with regards to the staff report?
No, we weren't sure how to go about the addresses. Different cities do it differently, and we just need to get with the public works guy and put our addresses on. If you could get the addresses on there. This is awesome, actually. And then at the setback line, we need 60 feet. We need it labeled, so we're
Alright.
good.
So no concerns with either one of those requests?
No.
Okay.
No, I think we already meet those. I know when the design was done, it was done thinking of all those rules. And then we have that, the southern property line, the fence has been there for 40 years, and the county has ownership on the other side of that fence. And that's what that quick claim comment about is we're just going to give that property to those owners that thought that it was theirs for ages. So it's an easy thing. In fact, I just got an email from Roy Barris. He's met with all those neighbors, and they're more than happy to accept that land that they thought they owned forever anyway. So, yeah. So, but we're fine with everything. We appreciate you guys' time, and staff's been wonderful to work with, and we're happy about it.
Great. Any questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just one note,
What's that?
just one note that I forgot to mention. They did
Yes.
reduce, I mean, we can argue whether they should add one lot back in, but they did reduce it by one lot to reconfigure some of the lines and give some space, so.
We're 2 lots down from the maximum that we could have under the code. We just wanted lots that were a little bit bigger. That's why we're really comfortable about the 60 foot and different things like that.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks for that clarification, Corey. I saw that in the staff report. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to this matter to step forward. Seeing no one step forward, we'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff? Further discussion or debate? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the final plat and construction plans for the Barris Cove subdivision subject to directives and conditions 1 through 5 as is laid out in the staff report and suggested reasons for action A and B in the staff report.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate?
I appreciate that they've, even though maybe they could have squeezed 2 more lots on as per the square footage area and the gross density, I appreciate that they were smart about looking at the setbacks and easements and were able to make a better situation here with just a couple less lots.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Hensy.
Aye.
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 Great. Motion passes. The recommendation will be sent to the City Council. Thank you so much. All right, and we'll invite Commissioner Hunt back up. Moving to item number 3 on our agenda, we are continuing our discussion of proposed revisions and updates to the city's subdivision ordinance, CMC 15. So we'll turn the time over to Lisa.
Great, thank you. I know you missed this at your last meeting. But we're already on chapter 5. I'm excited about that. And so we're starting into the actual applications for conceptual. So chapter 5 is conceptual, and then we'll do preliminary and final. So we have a 3-step process in Centerville. We're still proposing that 3-step process for most subdivision applications. There are some exceptions. I think what we can do is, what we've done before is just, if anybody has any comments on any pages, the 4 pages, but my first comment on page 1 is on the procedures. So it does explain here that most subdivisions have to go through conceptual, preliminary, and final, but there are some exceptions. And the exceptions that we list are small subdivisions, property line adjustments, plat amendments, and condominiums. And it says in here that the preliminary plat is not required. I want to reserve the right to maybe rethink this, because I do believe that some of these, like the plat amendments, we may want a 2-step process. It's hard for staff to scramble under the 1-step. I think we were trying to simplify when we drafted this with the consultant, but anyway, I'd like to have more discussion with the DRC when we bring these chapters back, but I think condominiums will probably need 2 steps as well. There's a lot of items that they have to do. So anyway, just know that that section might change, but if there's any other comments on page 1.
Lisa, I just had a question, a general question, I guess. Throughout this chapter, it refers to the concept plan.
That's what I was going to ask, actually.
But in practice, it's the conceptual plan, and we talk about conceptual plans, and the reports are for conceptual plans. Is there any potential problems, challenges to referring to it here as a concept plan, but everywhere else and everything else we do as a conceptual plan?
Well, we would be changing that terminology.
Oh, so, okay.
Yeah,
So a generation or 2 later, we'll get there?
Changing it to concept plan or from concept to conceptual?
To concept. So it's just whatever you prefer, but just.
Yeah, I think the original just chose the subdivision and the zoning ordinance to call it conceptual, but concept plan, sketch plan, there's all kinds of labels that you can use.
Well, one thing I wanted to make sure, and maybe this was the reason to distinguish, I don't want it to be confused with the conceptual site plan. So if we say concept plan for subdivision, then we're not confusing it with conceptual site plan.
No, I like that, actually.
Okay.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I had it's funny, I had the same reaction too. I was like, concept plan?
We're like, what is that?
Well, I had to go back and read it again and be like, wait, is that what? Is that a mistake?
But if you prefer the conceptual, we can go back to
Well,
that.
if you want to make the delineation between the concept plan and the conceptual site plan, I think that's an adequate reason to keep it the way it is.
Yeah, I was just gonna, well, I can check later, but I think that was the idea. Do you remember, Corey, do we call it conceptual site plan?
Yes, we call it conceptual,
Yeah.
and we did talk about
So,
keeping some distinguishments.
okay.
Okay.
And is there a place in here where it defines the difference between a concept plan and a conceptual site plan so that people aren't confused?
Well, the site plan is in the zoning, so no, I don't think, I haven't put in here.
Yeah, we just distinguish what the subdivision process is.
We would just have to tell them.
Okay.
On page 2, these are just the submittal requirements, and again, the concept plan is fairly basic. We have a vicinity plan, and then how they're going to lay out the subdivision, and again, we're trying to just require items that do not require any kind of engineering. So anyone can do this and understand for the application fee whether or not their subdivision makes sense and what kind of problems they might run into. So as we get into this, we can also look and I mean, my goal is to sort of have a list of, okay, here's what we require conceptual, here's what we require preliminary, and here's what we require final, and make sure that we're all satisfied that each process has the right requirements, and we may want to move some back and forth, but just looking through this, there's not a lot of information that's difficult to obtain at concept plan.
So Lisa, remind me, a chapter or two ago, we talked about, what were we talking about?
The existing conditions inventory.
Oh yes, the existing conditions inventory, that's what we were talking about. And there's a line in here, there on page 2, under B1, for the submittal requirements. Significant natural and man-made features on the subject property and within 500 feet of any portion of it. I actually really like that line, because this came up, in my mind, it came up with in our discussion on the existing conditions inventory to try and say, my thought was somebody might try and fudge on, oh, there's wetlands over there. Oh, no, they're not. They're over here. But by saying plus 500 feet, 500 feet, it's a lot harder to fudge that, oh, those aren't on my property. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I don't know, is that something that could be borrowed over there on the existing conditions inventory?
Well, that's a good point. I thought you were going to say, don't we already require that as part of the ECI? So
well,
I think
that's my next question.
Yeah, as I read that, so that's a good point. Let me look at that with the ECI and see how we state it. But I think even with the ECI, they are required to go within 500 feet because we do want to know about the property and the neighboring properties. But I will make sure those two are consistent and not duplicative.
Yeah. And the other thing too along those lines is in this Bears Cove example that we just had, the property line wasn't where everybody thought it was, right? And so you go and you do that existing condition inventory and you do it along where you think the property line is, but the property line is actually somewhere else. So this case, it's not, in their particular case, it wasn't an issue. I don't think it's an issue, but I could see it maybe being that if the property line is not where you think it is. So by adding 500 feet, usually property lines aren't off by 500 feet.
Yeah.
Yes,
I like
yeah,
that.
we're covering our bases.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good comment. Okay, on page 3, so you'll see the procedure, and this is going to be the same procedure throughout each of our applications. That we, number 1, determine if the application is complete, and that's a zoning administrator obligation to just double check and make sure all the boxes and all the requirements, it's not a substantive review. And if it's not complete, then we send it back to them. And then the application is sent to the department heads, and the department heads review that application, be it concept, preliminary, final. And then we submit it to the development review committee. They review it, and most of the time the DRC is the same as the department heads, but there are a couple extra department heads or the fire department, you know, that might fall under department head versus DRC. And then the big change here on concept plan from the way we do it now is this draft proposes that the zoning administrator can approve the concept plan. So currently we have the public hearing at the concept plan, and the Planning Commission makes that decision. So we would be moving that administrative decision back down to a staff level. So I understand, I think there's pros and cons, and admittedly, staff has gone back and forth on this, when to do this. So some of the positives that we see about the zoning administrator decision is, number 1, this is we're not asking for a lot. And it's something that staff can easily do and make sure that it complies with those simple procedures. By not requiring Planning Commission approval, it also allows staff additional time and reduces the time for the applicant. Because when you try to get something on a Planning Commission meeting, Corey always says it's a 3-week period because we have to get the application, we have to review it, we have to prepare a staff report, we have to provide the 10-day notice, whatever the noticing requirement is. So it's a very long time frame, whereas if this is staff approval, I'm not saying we're going to reduce that by much, but certainly a week or two where we can just review it, get it before the DRC, you know, make a couple follow-ups, so it significantly reduces the time frame. But the negative is that we would not be having the public hearing. And, you know, we've always said we have the public hearing at the beginning so neighbors can bring up any issues. But I was trying to review how many concept plans we've reviewed over the last couple years, and maybe half a dozen or, you know, 6 to 10. It didn't appear to me that there was a lot of public comment. Sometimes we will get that. But so we would be pushing the public hearing on a subdivision to preliminary, which is when the developer starts spending money. So by the time the public has some input, quite a bit of engineering, or some engineering, has gone into the preliminary plat. So I think you just have to weigh those, you know, balance those interests, whether or not it's important enough to.
The hard part for staff is, you know, it's the whole concept of the planning profession as a whole and education of the community. You know, when a concept comes in very early and we're just wrapping our minds around the issue, and we're trying to say, okay, you need to adjust this here, you need to adjust that here. And we're spending a lot of time at concepts just getting it down. Lots may need to be a little wider, the lines are not straight enough. And the public is coming here thinking, I don't like this, or I really like this. And I don't know if we'll totally get out of that thought pattern that administrative decision is not a vote on whether we like it or we don't like it. And so that can be confusing to the public, but at the same time, recognizing that somebody living close in a notice or something might know something that we don't know, that golden nugget that we search for in the public hearing. And then you have the other aspect that government is transparent with its decisions. And so we felt like the issue of concept plan is to get it into the administrative venue and somewhat of a reality, instead of somebody coming here and going, well, I'd like the lots to look like this, and it's not even close. And so we're trying to say, okay, let's narrow down that channel, get it into the administrative realm where we're just negotiating, are you doing what's needed, that we're transparent and we're letting the public know, but it's not really a vote of whether you like it or not. So it's a tug and pull of when do you entertain the public in being transparent and looking for the golden nugget.
In my experience, it seems like the signs that we put up are often one of the most viewed and effective means of communicating to the public what's going on. We put up that little A-frame. I wonder if you could even put that up and just when a concept comes in and just say, you know, if you have questions, contact Corey Snyder between the hours of 7 and 9 p.m. to discuss. Meaning, I wonder if you can still solicit
appreciate
public
the
input.
limitation.
Yeah, I think if you can still solicit public input, and especially if it's at the staff level, I think that could even help with the misunderstanding of, I came here to the meeting and you voted against me and that type of thing.
Yeah,
Puts it on your shoulders.
Yeah, that puts it on, I mean, you could get some really angry calls with pitchforks as well. I mean, how do you feel about bearing the brunt of that as opposed to us?
Well, and I've always said, I mean, some cities even
This is
have
protecting
public
the-
hearings at a staff level, but
That's
I
what I
don't
was
think
actually
that
wondering.
is, to me, if you want a public hearing, just bring it to the planning commission. I think it puts too much of a burden on staff, and I think that the quote that Commissioner Hunt gave at the beginning, you know, you're just looking at one person that has to funnel all this information. If you want public comment, I think the body should hear the public comment, but that's my personal opinion.
I agree with Logan on that, though. Those notice signs those are discussion starters for sure. And sure, a lot of times with these concept plans, there's not a whole lot of public input, if any at all sometimes, but maybe there is. And so my thought was, I was already heading the same direction that Logan was on that. But maybe we have some type of thing where the city will take public comment, written public comment. You can fill out a form online, you can mail in a letter, or you can come in to the office and fill out a paper or something like that, drop it off. But that way, Corey doesn't have to spend all of his days on the phone trying to defend or not defend a situation. We just present it as, hey, we're taking public comment. Please provide your written public comment. That way, Corey can decide, yeah, this is meaningful or this isn't, or this.
And you could even forward that along to us.
Yeah, I think if you walk that road, we certainly could put up, we certainly could put up a sign, and it could say, if you have any, I mean, we already put in there, do you have any questions? So we're already fielding calls anyway, because it's on there, call community development, and here's your questions. So we do field some of those calls. The issue of the written comment, I do like the idea that you can have a written comment that will be submitted later to the commission and just gathered. I think that's a positive for allowing to look for the golden nugget. I think the drawback is the space between when a developer submits a concept plan and that feedback and when they submit a preliminary plan. If you notice the public, let's say it's April for concept plan, but and you can look forward to this going through the process, but they wait till September. You know, I think the early notice all of a sudden confuses everybody if it takes a long time to get to preliminary.
I'm less concerned because we do invite public comment at the preliminary stage. And if there really is something that needs to be addressed, that gives us the opportunity to fix it at that point. And I think that every developer just has to recognize that because we don't have a public comment process early on, that they run the risk that if they're going to spend the money and the public comes out and identifies a problem, that they may be required to fix it. I mean, I know that we've talked about trying to help streamline the process, and I think I am inclined to, I mean, what's the harm in trying this new way and see if it works, and if it has problems, then we can come back and revisit it.
The new way being?
The new way being to provide the initial decision through
administrative.
Yeah, through the administrative decision rather than bringing conceptual to us.
Because we're just looking to see, is this a reality subdivision?
Right.
Because this is even within the realm of possibility. Or how far out of sync, if it is possible, how far out of sync it is with the requirements. So I think a lot of communities, staff do the sketch plan, as they call it, or the concept plan is a base to dialogue and get into the channel of the administrative decision.
It would save time, it would reduce burden to staff, and it still provides an outlet for public comment at the preliminary.
And it would reduce burden to the applicant probably 90% of the time.
I mean, if you have a significant development company doing this, they're usually already at preliminary by the time they're submitting concept or partly down that road. But it does help a local citizen who is trying to take some underutilized property, they want to develop it, they're not really in a position to put in a preliminary and all the reviews. They need, hey, I would like this idea, what do you think? And we have a little bit more time to work with them and get them on the right track rather than focusing on, oh, I got to get the notices out and get it on the commission agenda and write a report. And so I think it does help the smaller entity in their efforts to move it to this direction.
Yeah, so I think the big question, if you're inclined to try to, the recommendation to have it staff approved, then really we need to look at subsection B though, because right now it says no notice and no hearing. So is that something maybe you do want some notice with an opportunity for written comment?
I think we should still notice, right?
No,
But
well, if you notice,
no.
you're asking for it, I think.
Well, and I think you have the lag time between engaging the public because they're going to see a notice and then there could be some time, significant time even,
That's true.
before they come back.
Well, no, the notice would be for the concept. So in my mind, if you provide notice and say we want written comment, it's up to the zoning administrator to review that comment and take it into consideration in the staff decision. It's not something that we're pushing off. It's comment on the conceptual plan.
I just wonder how workable, and I really like your idea of the written comment because I think we're trying to work through and figure out a way that would be, that would allow for that public comment process, but I do worry a little bit about the practical implications when somebody calls Corey and they say, I have a real big concern, and Corey says, stop, I can't take your verbal comment, you need to go submit some written, it seems really odd, right?
And then if you give them only 2 days to get it in,
yeah.
or do you give them 14 days to get it in, that's not really saving time either if you're looking at it a time saver.
Yeah, I mean, you do make a good point though about if you leave it the way that it's written right here, then the burden really is on the developer to make sure that they checked everything out, because then when you get another step down the road and we figure something out, then it could cost them money to go back and
Yes,
fix it.
that's
I guess I'm just a little bit concerned that, I mean, do you think that that's at all, do you think residents would be at all worried about the fact that we're moving right along and they have no knowledge of what's happening and?
Well, but aren't we still gonna give residents 2 chances to come and talk to us? The
Yeah.
preliminary and the final? So
We are.
it's not like.
I'm not necessarily talking about hearing, I'm just talking about notice. For some reason, I think that's,
Well, there is the risk that at preliminary, they're going to say, why is this so far along and we haven't
Yeah.
even heard of it?
I'm a little bit.
So, and I think those are the concerns and why it's a
So
difficult.
that's why I was saying, can you make a notice and not have hearing? Can you make a notice and just say, public hearing to be scheduled at preliminary or something, like something like that where people can understand that.
Yeah, but to Corey's point, that could be
6 months down the
a
road.
long time down the road, and that doesn't work. I actually do kind of like the idea of presenting it this way, and maybe I'm talking myself out of my previous comments here, but I think it'd be good for the first time the public comes to see it, it looks, somewhat professional and somewhat well done here, right? Not just a drawing on the back of a napkin type of a thing. 'Cause
And half the time they're saying, what's going to really happen? What's it really going to look like?
yeah, what's it going to look
Da-da-da-da-da.
like? And this gives you a lot more detail about what it's going to look like, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think we need to remember this is a concept plan. I mean, this is someone coming in with an idea that they want to pass by, just say, hey, is this even possible? Can I do this? And then once some of those kinks are worked out and some of the rules, regulations are put on it and they decide, yeah, this is doable, I think that's when they would decide to move forward with it. That's when the community is notified.
Yeah.
I don't think anytime someone comes up with an idea,
Everyone has to know about
everyone
it.
has to know about it until a lot of those issues are worked out. And I mean, on this Barris Cove, we probably did 4 or 5 different layouts on it before we even presented it and got to where we're at now. And it changed quite a bit through that whole process. And I mean, if it was concept plan and then final approval, I could see that. But I just think the concept plan is a concept plan, and that's my opinion. But.
Well, and I go back to my earlier statement, right? This is where we as a government body should be allowed to try something and see if it works, right? I mean, put it out there. Let's see if it's a better way. If we run into problems, there's nothing to stop us in the city from revisiting it and going back to something different, so.
Well, and that's true too, because along those lines, we're making changes here. These changes are going to need to come back to us for public hearing, right? Go to the city council for public hearing. And then if anybody has concerns about this, then the public can let us know.
You've convinced me. I'm not, go ahead.
Subdivision goes concept, preliminary, final, then city council?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we're considering taking the council out, so it would be
Yeah, for now.
staff, planning commission, but.
Love it. That's okay.
But right now, it's conceptual at planning commission, preliminary planning commission, final at planning commission, final at council. It's a 4-step, which we really don't need, but.
I'll tell you what, the only thing is, as I keep reading through this, I am a little bit, I think if I didn't have an understanding of, I mean, I guess most people that are reading through this are gonna be developers and stuff, but we're having proposed conceptual plat application, concept plan, conceptual site plan. I don't know, I think I'm still kind of bugged about the concept, from conceptual to concept. Like they should just all be conceptual plat application, conceptual site plan, conceptual plan. I don't know. For me, that just is how I feel. That's just my opinion.
I don't see that that's a reasoning that's not reasonable.
Well, we'll leave that up to Corey, whatever he wants to call it.
I'll take that under consideration. You want to provide me written comment?
Just consider that. Just consider that if everything's
some notice
conceptual, then everyone understands like it's the very beginning of everything, you know, even though they're different things, but.
I think that's a good point.
Anything else on page 3, Lisa?
No. And page 4, my highlighting the substantive changes here is in the last section on expiration. We added in a clause here, subsection C, that number 1 I think is hidden and should probably be a major point. Number 2, I think this, as staff, we asked the consultant to add this in, which says you can't phase subdivisions, because we were getting, every developer that was coming in wanted to say, well, we're just gonna develop 2 acres of this 10 acres because they didn't want to put in all the public improvements. And so they're just phasing it, and phasing really needs more thought and a good plan, and this would just kind of simplify it and say, no, if you don't want to subdivide it all, you're just subdividing this, and then you're going to have to deal with that. But anyway, that might be one that we were a little restrictive to prohibit phasing of subdivisions.
Well, part of that is we have a subdivision on Park Hills Drive where the city didn't have a road connecting originally, and they come off and said, well, I want to just carve off 2 lots. And then, oh, I want to carve off 1 more lot. And it got to the point where it was difficult, because to get Park Hills through ended up being part of a controversial approval. And the rest of the land on each side of the property was to be further subdivided.
Yeah, I remember it was definitely, we were running into a lot of problems where people were trying to get around the code requirements for putting in the public improvements or really doing a subdivision. So we added that. I think we could leave it in the draft, but I would suggest that we put it in section 200, or we put it in, you know, we shouldn't hide it in the conceptual plan.
I mean, this is the difference between municipalities and counties. Counties, you'll have property owners that have farms that are a couple hundred acres in size, and they want to just take a portion of that farm and develop it. And obviously putting the subdivision improvements in, counties were saying, okay, that rest of the acreage, that's a lot, and pulling it into the subdivision. And they're just like, hey, wait a minute, that's overly aggressive. And the state stepped in on agricultural issues and tried to fix that. In the cities, you're usually not, unless you're a fairly new city, you don't, like Centerville, you don't have large tracts of land. And so...
Well, and that was going to be my question. I mean, I'm working on a 10-phase subdivision right now that will be built out over the next 12 years.
Right.
And granted, it's about 250 acres, but it's to say it all has to be done at one time, just that, and I don't think we're going to run into something like that here in Centerville if we don't have that much land for it, but
you could put in the alternate that says unless otherwise approved by the city.
Yeah.
And come up with a logical phasing plan.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of instances where it's at a minimum you have to have 4 or 5 lots improved at one time rather than 1 by 1 by 1 or whatever it is. But and I don't know how often you'd run into it here, but just sometimes, you know, putting on the hat of a developer is if they had a huge tract of land and they had to put all of those improvements in at once, and homes only sell at a certain rate. I mean, if they did 80 lots at one time, well, usually you only sell 8 to 10 lots in a year, and so they put in potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of improvements and won't even sell those out for 10 years. And so that's the only concern I could see for no phasing being allowed.
And I think that's valid. I mean, we have, but on the other one, if everybody remembers is it the Holbrook property where it was supposed to be the last phase of a subdivision, and then it sat vacant for a long time, split up between people. Then somebody wanted to combine some properties, bring it back into development. Citizens came out against the rezone because they wanted to extend their lots and buy. They were in the RL, it was AL behind them. They wanted to buy half of the property and absorb it into their RL lots and get the accesses. How are we going to terminate the stub streets were the matters. And then, you know, from a planning perspective, this was now taking the RL lots, putting them into a half acre that sits behind a house that is a future flag lot when people get tired of taking care of the land. So you have those tensions of not developing it.
Yeah, I think so. That's kind of my concern. So I'd suggest to take the phasing out of this section, because I think it's sort of hidden in this concept chapter, and put it in the chapter on general subdivision regulations, and add some sort of, if, you know, unless approved by the city, for phasing.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so any other comments or questions from the commission?
Oh, good work, Lisa.
All right, we'll bring the next one next time.
We're at chapter 5 and we have 106, right?
17.
Hey.
We are really excited that we've moved through
We're
5.
chugging
Corey.
ahead, right?
We are glass half full people over here.
Listen,
I am thinking if I can get 2 at a time, I will, but it's going slowly.
the definitions chapter took a while, right? So once you get through that, then.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I have a PTSD right now thinking about the definition section. Okay, moving right along on our agenda, item number 4. So we are going to be continuing to discuss the proposed revisions and amendments to the general plan in the South Main Street corridor plan. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Corey.
All right, as you're familiar, we had a work session with the city council. We sent up to the city council the strategy of addressing the recommendation that we'll keep a corridor general plan, and then we'll look at a change in the format of the overlay and what we need to do there. And I think the rough skeleton brings up the tension between the zoning ordinance issue. Is it an overlay or is it design standards? And I think if you look through the draft and you start seeing it, it could be tough either direction depending on how you want to apply the future to the corridor. But one thing, just for backup, is that you didn't get the Word version because I didn't want people copying the Word version out. There's 3 sections of our general plan outside of the corridor plan. So we have the general plan, which talks about commercial policies. There's a paragraph on Main Street about commercial policies in the general plan. Then there's 2 neighborhood plans, the southeast and the southwest, that also make comments about Main Street and don't really address Main Street as a corridor, just is the edges of the neighborhood. And so I'm trying to, you didn't get to see all the red lines, but those sections I'm just trying to unify. So there's not a lot of, there may be some substance you want to look at, but the reality of it is it's just trying to unify the language in those 3 sections. And typically what you're seeing is that they don't want the lots to go more than a half block depth on either side to keep it a small corridor, and there's consistent language of that. Also, the issues of, is this historic, is it unique, some of those statements. So I'm trying to unify that. The actual Main Street corridor, you're seeing the format. The format is an introductory section where you're justifying where you're going and how you got to where you're at and where you're going. This is important, and there are times that I might be overly frank in that section with how we're going. The example is the fire district was an example of amendments that took place, and but I'm also struggling with the concept of how do we in 2008 go this direction, and how are we in 2019 going another direction? What led up to that? So that there's a reasonable logic of why we're heading the direction. So welcome any comments on that and edits. A couple of setups in the that I think are important is in, I have a page, but it's where it starts breaking out just before the proposed goals. Starts breaking, you'll see some bullet points, commercial-wide viewpoints, North Parish Lane intersection. Sorry I didn't page it so that you get to it. Looks something like that. This is where things are starting to get into this rough place in the drafting in the future of the corridor. You know, what are we expressing our vision is? I tried to simplify our vision to those, I said 4, but isn't there 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 5 statements. So I'm trying to look at the corridor from different viewpoints. One is, okay, the corridor, and by the way, I shrunk it down in the narrative from Parish to Porter. So it's corridor-wide vision. We need to address what unifies the corridor, what we're trying to do in the corridor. We also have the issue of commercial use expectations, and I bring up some later elements about the commercial use expectations. From what I've heard, we may go a direction in residential, so I'm calling residential reintroduction. Whether that's the right term, I'm flexible, I'm just labeling that. What are these opportunities, and what would we consider? And it's not fleshed out into the goals yet, but that's an idea. The development design expectations, this is the concept that I heard in the past. There's still important things to justify either going to a design and having a zoning ordinance section on design and what we're trying to create out of that design. But I'm also thinking that there were some positive comments about preserving some of the design in the overlay. And so I think we have to think about what we're trying to do into the design. And then I still think the public space plan is important because we did have a long process about the very intensive, for lack of better terms, public space plan that didn't meet muster for adoption. But it was still set by the city to do a 4-foot park strip, 5-foot sidewalk, and make it symmetry on each side of the streets. And before I had made reasons why it shouldn't be symmetry, and the city has adopted a symmetry, so we need to express what we're doing. But also I think it's important to talk about the corridor itself as a modes of transit, and are there alternatives? The commission has sent in the past the striping of the bike lanes. And so I think we have some issues to ensure that what's the corridor and the expectation. We know it's a through traffic for UDOT, but what are we expecting in Main Street because UDOT won't take that context into play. They'll just do what their engineering does and what's best if we don't have a design. So I think we should still have a public space plan. I hesitate calling it that because it has such a negative view from the past, but it's still important to have a public space plan. The other concepts that are showing up, this is still reflective of the different lot types of our current. And just some quick reasoning why I think that might be important to call out is that although we're at Parish to Porter, the small lots oriented at Parish Lane, this is the dividing zone between the CH. On the west side, it's CH zone. On the east side, Papa Murphy's is CM zone. These aren't large properties, but then south of it is the CM zone when you have the 4-plex or 6-plex behind there, another single family home. I think you have a duplex before you really hit the post office. And so I think that's something to think about. How does that orient itself to Parish Lane? And is it really part of the traditional corridors as we thought in the past? Or is it more oriented towards Parish Lane? Do we want, the early idea, the concept is, do we want to allow some CH uses for those corners but still keep the 10,000 square foot limitation because they're small lots? Are we interested in that? And so that's this North Parish Lane intersection area running to Smith's Park or former Founders Park and the post office. Civic cultural area, I think that is a little different than a commercial development area. This building is 20,000 square feet, 22,000 square feet in size. So when I hear, oh, 10,000 square feet, that's sacred. Well, where and what? Because this building is quite large. I'm not sure what size the post office is. Remember the fire station, the overlay let it bump it to 12,000 square feet. Kind of caught everybody off guard apparently that it did. But I think back then we would have done what it took to get it to 12,000 square feet. So that's the issue that I'm thinking on the civic lot. Are we really 10,000 square feet in this section? I'm not sure City Hall's in a reuse perspective, but maybe the post office at some point in time. We don't know. It's a leased facility, by the way, so it's leased out from the property owner. So those are some of the thought patterns. And then you have what I would say is a traditional Main Street. And I put the museum in the Civic District, and then you kind of 100 North to Porter is really the traditional area. So feedback on that. And then the last one is in turning it over to you. The rest of it is really a skeleton. I tried to capture some elements that are existing. I tried to go back into the overlay, drag out some thoughts from the overlay that are still positive in my mind, and start crafting under these goals. It's really hard to craft goals because one of the thought patterns that I'm used to is you identify all the likes, dislikes, and desires in a charrette process, and that's when you start parsing it back into a statement. And then those statements start becoming objectives and goals. And you get that overarching goal accomplished with those statements and the ideas that were presented to the public. And so I haven't fleshed it out, but I'm trying to section it off into those 5 different areas and then throw in early ideas, existing ideas. As you can see, it's not really fleshed out at this point, but really what I'm seeking from the Planning Commission is this is the citizen hat period, and Chair Heyman and I had a conversation, and so I'm really saying if you have, treat it like a charrette. I think this idea should be explored, or I have a vision for this opportunity. Let's gather some of those so that I'm not in a vacuum designing this corridor from my imagination. And then I can work with those, I can work with those and bring them back to you, and we can flesh them out and say, oh, because I can put in some parameters that I think are important, and you can say, no, that's too tight, no, let's loosen it up, no, now I realize that's not a good idea. And I know we have a hustled time frame. Chair Heyman and I talked about the reality of that time frame. It's going to be tough to keep that time frame, but we're attempting. We're starting with the general plan stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chair Heyman, and put on your hats, and if there's concepts and ideas you want to explore, I'll do that and start trying to put parameters around them.
Thanks, Corey. I like the 5 sort of vision areas that you've created, right? Because I kind of view those as umbrellas, and then we can start fleshing out what we want under each one of those. And I like that you've given us some ideas. We may like some of those, we may not like some of those. I think it gives us a place to start talking about it. And I agree, I think this is a great opportunity for us to brainstorm, and I don't think that we should be tied to necessarily even what's in Corey's report, right? I mean, I think this is a really good opportunity for us to go, okay, what do we want our Main Street to be? And as I was thinking about this process, we as a planning commission, as I've been here, we kind of march down a road and we get really wedded to something, and we get very excited about it, and we get very passionate about it, and I think that we become very focused on one plan. And I wonder if we're going, I'm just throwing this out here because this is of course brainstorming session, right? But as we start thinking about these different uses, do we want it to be commercial? Do we want it to be more residential? Do we want it to be something else? I wonder if we shouldn't kind of keep our minds open on this and maybe even think about not necessarily presenting only one very detailed plan to the city council, but saying, well, if we want to do it more commercial, here's sort of how we would do it. And if we wanted to do it more residential, here's how we would do it. So that when we're sending it up to the city council, they may like one over the other, or they may take elements from both rather than just shooting down, one plan that we send up. So that was my initial thought.
Well, I like that, especially since with this, wasn't the plan to be a little bit more interactive with the city council along the way so that we can kind of get some of that feedback. So sure, I think that's a good way to go.
So, but let's start, so I want to just give you my thoughts on sort of how I'm seeing this go. And I want to make sure that we do it right. So while I am cognizant of the city council's desire to try to get this thing done and get it done quickly, I think that we should try to work towards that. I'm also very cognizant of this is a big thing that we're working on, so I don't want to ram it through so quickly that we get a subpar product, but what do you guys think about the 5 areas that Corey has kind of designated in terms of looking at the corridor wide viewpoint, the commercial use, the residential use, the design expectations, and the public space plan? Are there any other, do you think that those 5 adequately capture sort of the buckets that we need to be thinking of? Are there ones that we need to be thinking additionally? Or any of those ones that you think, we don't need to worry about that, let's focus on these other 4? Because I liked them, but I want to get your thoughts on that first, on the framework, and then we can start fleshing each one out.
Well, I honestly think that I think we go all in on commercial or we go all in on residential, but not both. I don't really see a situation where they both work well together. And here's part of my thinking behind that is, so I believe our Main Street is unique. That's a conversation that we've had before. It's not Bountiful Main Street unique, but it's Centerville unique. And it's our secondary commercial area of the city. And I think that we can maintain it that way. If we were to say residential, let's do residential. I don't believe that the general residents of Centerville, and certainly not the city council, have the appetite for the density of residential necessary for it to look the way that I think it should look. And if we say we want single family residential, which is what was mentioned at the work session, you're going to get single family residential with a white vinyl fence fronting Main Street, and the houses are going to be hidden behind that fence. And so if you want that, Main Street, we're done with a unique Main Street. It's going to look like a white vinyl fence corridor, and then it's just lame, in my opinion, right? So, but if we want to go residential, then we've got to be willing to go all in on that. So that's why I say we either need to go with residential all the way and say, look, it's going to be residential. We're kind of done with Centerville Main Street being unique. Let's just put up the white vinyl fences, or be willing to put in density. Or let's say we're not going to do the residential, and let's focus on trying to develop some kind of unique commercial district in the city.
I don't
When
know
you
that
say
I
all, I'm sorry, when you say all in, what do you mean all in?
Well, what I mean is if we're going to say let's do residential on Main Street, the feeling that I get from the work session, which I wasn't there, but I read the minutes and whatever else, is, and from others, is that we want single family residential in Centerville. That's kind of the appetite, is single family residential. Maybe not exclusively, but certainly that's been the trend lately. And so in order to get single family residential, you're not going to front Main Street with single family residential. And so the only way to make that type of development work is to put it behind a white vinyl fence and essentially say that Main Street is not really for commercial anymore. It's not unique for commercial. It's just going to be the backs and sides of single family residential neighborhoods. That's what I mean by all in on that.
Yeah.
Because then if you were to try and say, no, we still like the uniqueness of it, it's not really going to be that appealing as a secondary commercial district if it's also scattered along with these white vinyl fences. That's what I mean by all in.
Can it be a different type of housing? Can it be a more
Well, I kind of mentioned that a little bit. It could be, but I don't believe that there's the appetite in the city for that type of stuff. Certainly when Brighton came along and tried to do that more dense stuff with the O'Brien glass, and that didn't go over well with a lot of residents. But maybe the appetite's changed in the last, how many years has it been? 4?
Has it been that long? Holy shit.
But
because the demand is there.
Sure.
The demand is, but I agree, I don't think the appetite for it is there. I think you'd get a lot of pushback from the community if you were gonna do something like that. That's my opinion. The problem I think with going commercial is, I think we kind of mentioned before, is that it just hasn't been successful, and it's led to where nothing is moving forward. I don't know if that's because the code is such that it's made it hard. I have no idea, but it's hard. I think that's the point, is it kind of seems like it's deteriorating, because that's kind of what it is left at right now, is it's commercial. And so I don't know, it's a hard balance to know how to do it best. But
Corey, could we establish a code that said if you develop residential, here's your design criteria, if you develop commercial, here's your design criteria? Or does the code have to be indifferent to use and just?
No, if you take example of our Shorelands Commerce Park, we have an area that's a mixed-use area to support the business park, and you'll see the industrial design guidelines there, and you'll see the residential design guidelines, and then it talks about how much is going to be residential, how much is going to be supportive to the business park as a mixed-use zone. So you can include both in there. The difficulty on a small area is the issue of compatibility. I think you're right. You could say residential needs to front Main Street, but now you're asking yourself what type. Brownstone, Sesame Street, probably more likely. But back to the close setbacks. Residential wants a front yard generally, even in some multifamily, to the most part, even if it's small. And so if you had a 2-foot setback to commercial and a greater setback for residential, or vice versa, that boundary of where it develops can create some friction. Because if a commercial use is, as we've experienced in the past, has an exhaust fan of pizza smell blowing into the front living room, and you introduce the residential, the residential feels like it's been invaded by the commercial, even if the residential came later.
Can I just ask a quick question? What did Brighton propose at the dry cleaners?
It was around, I believe, they took a couple of years, so it was probably 2010, 11 is my guess.
But what was it they proposed?
Which time?
It wasn't 2000.
That's the interesting part.
Yeah, it was exactly 4 years ago.
It was originally.
Was it 4 years ago?
Yeah.
They basically had, their initial proposal, I think, showed
Might have been
somewhere
4.5
their
years.
actual submittal versus one they were just initially drafting up was around 50 units. They needed to reduce that to even meet the code requirements, but we're talking in the 30-unit category, 35-unit category.
Multiple levels or?
Multiple levels, but it required a commercial component, and one of the allowance of a commercial component was a live-work unit, and the live-work units were fronting Main Street. But there was even at a staff level, is that a sufficient commercial component to drive any commercial? Yes, you can have a live-work unit, but was that really going to drive it, or was this just a live-work unit with a fancy front room at street level?
And then they later changed it to put in a little subdivision of single-family homes, and there were,
Yes.
what, like 25, 30 of them that they had
Right.
put in there, but that
And then
fizzled
the
as
side of the
well.
houses faced the street. They wanted a
Yeah.
fence to encumber the side yard to Main Street.
I think that that's a pretty unique property, just given the depth that it is, and I don't think that
the
you're gonna see
size.
that,
Yeah, now that you have the fire department there, that will change it significantly.
Although it is, I think that we should keep in mind that there was some appetite in the city council to recognize a difference between the east and the west side. I mean, if you think about the west side on that strip that we're talking about, there's already a bunch of multifamily housing, sort of just, 1/2 block back from that. And so I think that if we're thinking about the residential component, that might be an area where it would make sense to do more multifamily housing to help stimulate that development. And maybe you could do something more akin to what you see sort of in Salt Lake, right? Where if you want to put some kind of businesses
That's what I
up
was
front
thinking,
with
yes.
the multifamily housing in the back, it helps fill that in. And if you can have the businesses on that west side that integrate in with the residential, but then you still have just the commercial, the soft commercial, whatever we want to call that, on the east side, maybe that's a way to create some synergy and also help develop.
Yeah, I mean, you have Cook Builders was interested into the form-based code and doing a mixed-use development for their property. You do have a few homes. You have the old floral business, but you have some deep lots that sit back in there that you could maybe do something with in a multifamily, adjacent to a multifamily zone.
That's what I'm thinking. You're not going to have the people, the single-family residences behind panicking because you're putting in multifamily. You're already going to have multifamily housing there. So if anything, it might help stimulate and renovate them existing multifamily, right? You put up a lot of new, nice multifamily, it helps stimulate to get some of the other people to invest, and anyway.
So, I really liked your skeleton, or whatever you're calling it. I liked how you broke up the area into 3 sub areas. And I think that's important for us to consider because, you know, long-term plan for this civic cultural area is that this does become more of a town square type of spot with acquiring additional property, long-term plan. If you look at any Parks and Rec plan, and I was on the Parks and Rec, and we talked about that long term down the road, we want this Smith Park to be big enough to actually meet the needs of the entire city. So this is an area right here that's going to look very different than just even a couple blocks down south towards Porter Lane. So I think, while I understand what you're saying, Kevin, about being all in, I don't think we necessarily have to do that with this. I think having these 3 delineated spaces or areas really help us to recognize that even within a few blocks, there are some significant differences. And even within, as to Shaylin's point, east and west, there are some significant differences that we can address. So I've appreciated that in there. I also really caution, and I've said this a few times, so I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but I really caution just jumping wholeheartedly into residential for a number of reasons. One is because we have existing uses. Corey's mentioned many times that majority of the owners, the business owners on Main Street are residents or nearby residents. And I want us to respect that for even though, you know, people say Main Street's not unique, all this stuff, you know, the fact that we have people that live in Centerville and work in Centerville within just a mile or so of their house is pretty great. It's pretty unique to me, and I think it's something that we should be supportive of. And instead of just saying, well, you know, maybe they don't look really cool, maybe they don't look exactly like we want them to, or whatever, there's some thriving dentists, there's some thriving office spaces, there's some thriving, you know, in Centerville terms, some places that still need to be maintained and respected for that. So I don't want to necessarily say like, oh yeah, let's just turn it all into residential, because that doesn't really take into consideration what is here and the potential of having it stay for a really long time. And then B, the other reason why I don't feel like we should jump wholeheartedly into residential is because putting the vinyl fence up, going with the single family, which may or may not be the majority of the residents' desire, which I actually, in my opinion, I don't think it is the majority. I think there's some vocal people who think that it's the majority and say that it's the majority, but I don't think the majority of Centerville's like, yes, single family residents along Main Street is the only plan for Main Street. So I think we have to be careful to say like, because we heard it from somebody, it's what everyone wants. But I think if I caution against that also, because if we were to just turn our backs to Main Street, to me, it's sending a signal to the state that we're turning our back to this street. Do whatever you want with it. Change it however you want. We no longer have any sort of ownership over it, which I think is a very dangerous situation to be in, seeing it as it runs through the majority of our whole little town has this Main Street running all the way through it. So we just have to be, I keep saying like, let's try to get as much ownership of this as we can. I'm not telling the state like we want to take over this road, but I do want to make it feel like we have a lot of say and a lot at stake in any decision that they make.
You know, your comments lead me to a practical thought, which is long-term. Commercial is really good for our city from a revenue standpoint. I mean, if we have a lot of residential in that area to the point that it eliminates the commercial aspect, we get a good infusion on a one-time basis, right? But then long-term, that is not economically the best decision for our city, which, I mean, I've tended towards keeping that corridor commercial to the extent that we can. And I think I'm at least preliminarily right now leaning towards more of a keep the commercial on the east side and work in some type of a mixed commercial residential on the west side. Because I think that if you allow that on the west side, it will incentivize growth on that side, which will spill over to the east side, right? Like, I think I can see that that would be the flashpoint on the west side to help create synergy on the east side. But I think that from just a revenue perspective, having businesses along that main street is good for us as a city.
And it's good for, you know, if you're looking long-term, I know there are always going to be residential pressures. I mean, they're never gonna go away, and they're just gonna get greater and greater. That's the reality of where we live. That's the reality of living on Earth right now. You know, like, that's a reality. But at the same time, there is also a reality of more flex work areas, working from home, telecommuting, spaces where people come and it's close to home and they don't have to necessarily drive far, far away. And there's always going to be a market for services, in which a lot of those commercial uses are services along our main street. So I just think we have to be really careful about, maybe it doesn't look exactly the way that we want it to, but I think we can try to improve it to a degree that, you know, business owners are willing to do and incentivize that however we want to make that happen. But I don't think we should just say, well, because it isn't necessarily redeveloping the way we want it right this moment, it's not viable.
Yeah, I like the 5 segments also, but I also agree with Shaylin that I think we need to at least entertain a balance. It's not bountiful like you said earlier. It doesn't have the 2 freeway on-ramps and off-ramps, and we just have the 1. And over time, business will grow. I mean, but maybe not in my lifetime. I mean, it'll just take time for that to happen. But I think if we at least consider the balance, I agree that could create an incentive for more businesses to be around, if they see some growth on the housing side.
And see, I think that even in your lifetime, we could see some businesses grow. We need to take the shackles off of this, and we talked a lot about this with the permitted uses part. Let's take the shackles off. I think we take the shackles off on the design standards as well. Let's put something in place that's, you know, business owners are going to want to make their places look nice anyway if they're going to do something. But let's put some. I mean, I don't know. Parish Lane's got some nice standards, right? And we have a beautiful looking Parish Lane.
Those are fairly restrictive, though. I'll be honest with you. But I like
they are. And I'm not saying let's go to that full extent, right? But let's do something. Let's put it in place so that, you know, it's like, look, if you're going to develop it, here's some minimum expectations for what we're going to get. But let's, in general, take those shackles off. And I think that you're absolutely right, Shaylin, on we need to see some development with commercial stuff. Otherwise, we probably need to get used to regular property tax increases to help make up for increasing costs, and the sales tax and property tax aren't covering it, right?
Well, and I think that's a good point, Kevin, because, you know, even though Parish Lane design guidelines are like what would be considered slightly restrictive, there's no form-based code on Parish Lane. So when we remove that, and if we can still maintain some design standards that we feel really comfortable with, that will already be taking shackles off from where we start to here, you know, but we can still have some control over not just whatever you want, you know, kind of a thing on Main Street.
Sure.
And I think, I mean, as I've thought about this, form over design, right? I'm starting to lean more towards the design element, because I think that it would really help create, I mean, a really beautiful street if, fine, I mean, I know that the city council is really worried about if you develop more than 30% of your property, then you have to move the building forward, right? Okay, fine, let's get rid of that piece of it. But if every time that these buildings start to renovate in any significant way, and they all start to come into compliance and match color-wise, and maybe with some rock features or something, right? And it starts to look a little bit more cohesive as a street, well, yeah, okay, now we're not Bountiful, right? But now we have a unique Centerville Main Street, and I still think that as you start to see that, we just need to get the synergy rolling, and then it's going to incentivize others on that line. I mean, okay, let's be honest, it hasn't for the Little Caesars. I keep hoping it will for the Little Caesars along Parish. Along Parish.
That, huh?
No, they haven't, but everything else along that stretch is beautiful.
Because they're like one of the most, did you know they're one of the most busy Little Caesars in the entire nation?
I visited a lot, that Little Caesars, and
Isn't that insane?
We have a good relationship, but I do think that design, I think, is weighing out a little bit more importantly for me at this point, particularly if we're going to just say commercial. I still feel very strongly that we need to unloosen the shackles on the uses. I know that the city council is a little nervous about that, but I think that that is going to be a great way to help
I agree.
Incentivize some development along that street. Let's take off some of the more substantive restrictions, make up for it in guidelines.
So I got a quick question on that subject. There's two ways to approach it, and this is the tension between using an overlay versus trying to use design guidelines. Design guidelines will handle any issues you want to addressing in public space as well as building. We can come to an understanding of that. Expanding the uses. You know, one way to expand them is what we tried before. You expand the CM zone use list. If you see in here, I'm not saying CM zone, I'm saying, okay, if you orient here, we'll consider maybe some CH. If you orient here, we'll consider some additional public space. So I think that's the question. Do we want to look at it from a CM perspective and still add some uses, or do we want to look at it from an overlay perspective and allow uses through the overlay?
I think that since the CM only exists in the overlay, let's stick to the CM stuff.
I agree.
That just helps me to know how we're going to broach the use list.
Yeah.
Corey, I wonder if you could weigh in before we moved away from the materials and stuff like that we like in the Parish Lane Design Guidelines. On your development design goal number 4, on 4B, you talked about avoid making requirements that will lead to a themed look.
Yeah, I don't like that.
I disagreed with that.
I disagree with that too.
Were you referencing things like how we quick crack car wash and turned it into the same thing that we did to Sonic?
No,
I love that.
I love the quick quack. I just, for the record,
Yeah.
Yes.
every quick quack I see, I'm like, yes, look at our quick quack. It's so nice.
This is Corey's bias, and I can explain it. I threw it in there really quick. I struggle as a planner with Gateway. A lot of people like Gateway, but I struggle. I struggle with it because that's a themed development. It's awfully, big tract of land built in, but that design is theme, and people do like some theme. But when I'm thinking of Main Street, I'm thinking of Old Town Midvale, well, not Bountiful, but I'm thinking Old 25th Street. I'm thinking of Place, I'm thinking of Kanab, and again, it's not the issue that we want the on-street parking and anything else, but this is where architects in the early 1900s were most successful. You didn't have your planner and you didn't have your engineer, you had your architect. If you go down and separate the issue of the form base of 25th Street, because I worked at 25th Street, you see a very eclectic architecture, but based on the principles of an architect. And so it has an organic feel to it, which is a localized feel. If you plot down a bunch of design stucco along Main Street, you'll have your theme, but I'm not sure it's reflective of your community. It's just another Anywhere USA Mall theme. I like Parish Lane too, but it started out strong. You were going to only have the Farmington Fieldstone, which was really the Weber rock. And you see the America First Credit Union, how heavy of rock is on that. That started out. It compromised the Farmington Fieldstone, but the Zions Bank was rebuilt with the stack stone. And if you remember, it's not the old, but it's the old Wendy's versus the new Wendy's. Then you see the compromise to the Walmart, to the artificial stone. And so there was this theme, and then it broke down. And you can criticize, the theme can be attractive, or the breakdown can be disarray or attractive. But I do think that, in my mind, Centerville needs to not mimic Farmington, not mimic Gateway, and maybe not mimic Parish Lane. What is it that we would be acceptable along Main Street that has a more organic feel to it through time, rather than everybody is just doing the stacked stone down the street when they remodel?
Well, I appreciate that perspective, Corey. I will disagree slightly because I think Gateway there was a big purpose for Gateway. It was Olympics, put it all together, it's all being developed at the same time. So I actually don't see that as a themed look. I see that as just one giant, massive development. I see Park City as a themed look, and Park City is very, very, very strong theme. And when you go into Park City, you feel like you're in Park City because of how everything looks. Now, some could argue like this is too oppressive, that's too oppressive of a theme or whatever. But I don't think that because Park City has a theme, it's taking away their unique city character. I think, on the contrary, that by going...
Well, it has a resort theme. And
yeah, with that theme. So we're not going to put a resort theme.
Do you have a theme, though?
I think trying to make it more organic is actually leaning towards more of the form-based code. Like, you know, those things that you mentioned, I think that's great. That would be fantastic. That would get us that old towny look, feel, but that's something we've tried, and that's not really what's happening. So if we're going to take off the shackles and say not form-based code, we just want to have some sort of cohesion happening here. That's what I'm sort of leaning towards. It's like, maybe not that it's, you know, Park City, but that it has some semblance of, yeah, I'm driving through this area and it feels like there's a theme here.
What does that? What are design elements do that for you? Materials?
I think materials, colors.
Mm-hmm.
Heights.
But are you looking at it where we have the typical performance standards? We want front elevation articulation, and we want 20% rock or brick or stone. Have you really created, I mean, yeah, it's easier, but
well, maybe we
you're not going
haven't
to have
created
that. You're not
something
going to have
yet,
that organic. You're not going to have that organic element. Parish Lane ended up an organic element because the developers kept pushing the materials because they didn't want to quarry the Farmington stone was extremely expensive, and it was not Farmington stone. And then through time, people just pushed back. Wendy's pushed back. Walmart came in with the artificial fieldstone, you know, and the cement. So the city went for a theme, and then it broke down over time. Now that could be organic, but it did break down from its original theme. And are you okay with that?
Well, I think maybe we could learn from some of Parish Lane. And Parish Lane, correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, but part of the design there is you got to have a walkway from the sidewalk up to the front door, right? Yeah. Roughly, isn't that kind of the thing on Parish Lane?
Yeah, they tried to take some form-based and apply it to the public realm, which didn't work very well.
Yeah, it didn't work really well. So that's part of my thing is maybe we don't do stuff like that because it comes out looking funny. Certainly in some more car-oriented.
The walkway through the drive-through at Dairy Queen.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. But maybe we do try and figure out some way to get comfortable with certain materials or a certain percentage of materials being used to try and tie things together, but not make it so oppressive that people are like, I can't afford to do that because I have to, you know, redo my whole frontage and all that other stuff. But something to bring it together.
So I want you to know that my bias is that I love Disneyland and Disney World. I'm a super huge Disney fan, so I really like the idea of themes.
Yes.
So I sort of gravitate more towards a theme, but I think when I think of theme, and I don't know that I have anything in my head exactly right now about what I want it to look like, but I don't know that we need to start where we started with the parish design guidelines. What if we start where we ended with the parish design guidelines, right? You said, hey, it sort of organically expanded to allow for it. We started out with you could use these 5 things, and by the time we got done, you could use any one of these 15 things. Well, great, let's maybe start with the 15 things then along Main Street and figure out what that is to allow people flexibility, right? So that not everything is exactly themey, but at least it sort of fits together, but then starts to have that cohesive feel, whatever it is. And I don't know whether that's rock, whether it's brick, whether it's, you know, colors, whether it's...
If you supply a broad opportunity to use heavy-based materials, then you might get some variation. It creates a more organic look than saying it has to be rock or it has to be...
Well, And I think the
Correct.
public space plan lends itself to allowing that cohesion as well. I mean, if we have a strong public space plan and we have design guidelines, right there, that's gonna already make such a difference, even if we don't like choose a theme, but if we have strong design guidelines that have some flexibility, but that are cohesive, that someone could say, ooh, that, I could see the theme there. You know, it's not gonna be a themed look, but it's going to be definitely coming together better.
Yeah, and it's not nearly as expensive as what they have to do now, right? I mean, if you're gonna update your building, and that requires that you maybe throw on, 20% brick or stone or something, stone look-alike, whatever we wanna do, right? There to make it cost-effective for owners along Main Street, but that will create that cohesive look.
I just, Santa Fe, New Mexico has a themed look. Park City has a themed look. Main Street, Disneyland has a themed look.
Disney does it right, Corey.
They do it right. I mean,
That's master planning right
the
there.
devil in the details. I mean, I do love Disneyland, not just for the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? I do like the details that they put into it, and that is a theme. I'll agree with you. It can look nice. I'm just concerned about getting too stuck into a certain stacked rock stucco, and that's all it defaults to.
So how do you classify 25th Street?
Well, it's a traditional Main Street. You'll see the lower 25th on the south side was the new design guidelines for 25th Street. And I think it worked well from a form-based standpoint. But if you look at the Atticus building on the corner by Union Station, that was the first beginning of the standards, and when they built that at a one level, everybody just came unglued. And so the south side from Lincoln to Wall Avenue is the new standard. Okay, it did well to frame the street, but I wouldn't say it has the same organic as the rest of the street.
Okay, I haven't been to Kanab for a long time, but why did you mention Kanab?
It has a very traditional downtown, typical of small towns USA. You have a highway corridor going through. Vernal is the same concept. Springdale has a very themed look attached to Zion, so it's a highway corridor too, and it works well for Springdale. I'm just trying to say, do we have a theme that we're strong to, or we want to relax that and let people do some more organic development?
So I have a question for you. Is if we include in our standards, design standards or redevelopment standards that include the city doing something at the same time as any kind of redevelopment, would that require us to be a special taxing district? Or can we, we say, if you start redeveloping, we will also do this from our city, and then we can create.
Talking about the public spaces?
Well, yeah, but also, I don't know, would that be just sort of to make sure that we have some cohesion?
Well, you've got, there's multiple ways to attack the public space. It's lot by lot by lot by lot, that's of course. You also have the issue of you're trying to redo a street to a standard that you want for public space. RDAs will fund that, special improvements districts can fund that. You could also, I think Salt Lake, Lisa, you're familiar with Salt Lake, there is some incentives for some businesses to put into public space. They put into public space, but then it's maintained by a common entity, isn't it? I think in Salt Lake. The business association takes care of the public space once it's built. And you could subsidize from a general revenue fund or some other fund that they want to do. Whether, I throw out names, but, I know that they've borrowed against the recreation and arts tax. I think some of those are used in Salt Lake for some improvements. So there's different ways to fund it, but ultimately, yeah, you can, that's the struggle with the public space plan is we're working with UDOT. When will they do construction? Should we wait better to use the money for that and with them and partner with the betterments? So UDOT will do a project, but then if it's betterments, cities participating in that betterment program.
Right.
And now it becomes a timing. Are you waiting for UDOT for the betterment program? Are you working with UDOT in partnership and we're funding them through a mechanism that the city decides to employ?
It seems like because we are shrinking, right, the part of the Main Street that we're talking about, it seems like this creates a really great opportunity for the city. So if we partner with the owners along that Main Street, I mean, I know part of the plan that we had sent up to the city council that they did not appreciate as much was some of the elements that we had. But one of the ones I really, really liked was having sort of decorative lights, right, along that area. And so since we're talking about a really small area, right, if you start getting some common designs, right, so that you're not getting, I mean, while I like giving people the ability to do whatever they want, I don't want a quick cut car wash type design on Main Street. If I have a way through design guidelines to help kind of shape that a little bit, and then you start getting in some of those nice decorative lights, and okay, fine, no benches, no planters, no any of that stuff. You put in a 5-foot sidewalk and you get some nice cohesion in terms of building materials and some colors. You get some nice lighting fixtures up. That's not a huge change, but I think that it would make the world of difference along that Main Street, particularly if we're able to open up some uses. Yeah. I mean, and those aren't huge changes, and I think it could stimulate and make a big difference.
I think that comes down to the argument of economic development within a city, and how do they want to broach economic development to support the businesses that are there. And certainly Main Street is potentially in some need, because there is a little bit of you build it, they will come too. If there's commitment on the city, on a street, that's why UDOT will do the betterment program. If you're committed to that, there is some leadership that comes from economic development, putting in some public space improvements and saying, hey, we want to change. And then you'll start seeing some follow, and then again, it's the market too. When does a business owner want to change? What is the market doing in that area?
Do we have any idea, I don't know who I would ask this question of, but what kind of revenue that we as a city get from those businesses along Main Street?
I'd love to know.
I mean, because if we're thinking about investing, right, if we're trying to weigh the decision between, hey, do we want it more residential? Do we want it more commercial? Well, what benefit are we getting out of that commercial right now? Because if we're getting a little bit of benefit, but we think that by investing a little bit of money, we could get a huge return, that would sure be nice to know.
Yeah, and that's part of that economic analysis. I know we have the valuation data of investment along the corridor, but I don't think we have the tax generated to the city directly.
Yeah, and I think that came up in the work session, that it would, before you're going to eliminate your tax base, you might want to know what that is, whether or not you want to protect it, as well as the property taxes and the property tax rates versus residential.
Well, and versus investing a little to get a much bigger return. I mean, we do have vacancies along that street, and there are buildings that are underdeveloped, underutilized, and there are small buildings that maybe you tear them down and put in a bigger commercial building, right? And it will not only look better, but it will create more tax revenue for the city. I just don't know where we would go to find those numbers.
Shaylin, Corey, are there forums for the current business owners to talk to the city council or planning to express what they would like, as you talk about an investment, what they would like the city to invest in so that they'll invest more money or bring more commercial? Have we ever had a forum?
Well, I did this whole thing.
I did that last summer.
Yeah, this whole thing.
I mean, we have one owner who's come to the city and said, all I want you to invest is to allow to open up more uses because I can use this area. And the city said no. I mean, to put it very bluntly, the city council said no.
Pretty concise
right?
summary, but yeah.
But I would say on a regular basis, no. On a regular forum, the business belongs to the chamber. It operates on a much larger scale than the local businesses along Main Street.
Doesn't the city council still have, are they still doing their open door meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they could come at any time, but not necessarily.
But have we done anything to encourage that? I mean, to bring them in?
Not on a proactive basis. It's been a reactive basis to any proposals or changes that we're making.
And the last reactive was no.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I've done quite a few projects where financially it was a little bit questionable if the development should happen, the city wanted it to happen, and they stepped in and helped make some accommodations, because they saw that it would end up benefiting them in the long run, and I don't know how that would work here, but I think that's a great point, that sometimes you have to spend a little bit to get that in return, especially if it's what we, want as a community to have that Main Street to be and to look, so that's a great point. Something to look into.
Well, Corey, in terms of next steps, I mean, I think that we've had a good discussion, and we haven't hit on every single one of the points that you put in your list. I liked a lot of them. I disagreed with your themed comment, but
I disagreed with that, and I also disagreed with streetscape trees should be discouraged.
That's coming from staff. They don't want them in the
I know
4-foot park
that.
strips.
I know that's coming from staff.
Yeah.
I still disagree with it.
Yeah, I think.
Because you can have a certain tree that only goes to a certain height and doesn't drop stuff and is very low maintenance,
but I think
and those are the trees.
I agree, but I think you have to look at the physical environment. On the east side, you have the power lines. It's better to set the trees into the front yard setback than it is into the Park Street on that side. On the west side, you have a topography problem in a lot of the areas where it drops off, and you only have you don't have a park strip right now at all within that. If we do the symmetry, you could have a park strip. But I also think that the walkability issue for me is if you're dealing with a 4-foot park strip, go down to the conference center in downtown Salt Lake. Look at how far back all of the buildings and the walls and the property lines are. Now you got to remember that's back when it was 90 feet wide and we turned a wagon team around into it. But they carry the hardscape all the way out to the curb. They do have the planter areas that interrupt that and create a small little area, walkway between the curb. But I think if we look at, we could better use the 4-foot park strip and put in wider sidewalks that function better for everybody walking and the students walking down than to try to put in a 5-foot sidewalk as a street tree. I think if we put the street trees back from underneath the power lines, I think if we put the street trees back off into the setback, we can use the public space for a couple of items. Wider sidewalks, I think decorative street elements. If I had my vision, we would use bollard lighting through the civic district area and maybe even the traditional district area. Pedestrian bollard lighting on the wider sidewalks would create a different look than what we tried to do on Parish Lane and compete with the Cobra heads. And so I think you can do a better streetscape dealing with hard surfaces and design than try to throw in a tree, because the trees are going to function better in the front yards along Main Street, in my view. But you could disagree, just like you disagreed with theme.
Well, I think that the power lines definitely they present a significant challenge along there because they really limit heights and stuff. But for walkability, I was just looking at some of the street view pictures of 25th Street in Ogden, and other places are like this too. I think one of the things that helps, and we've heard this a little bit from some of our feedback with the public at times, is they feel like the cars are right there on top of them. So if you were to put things in between the cars and the people, but obviously not saying planter boxes and benches and all that other business, right? Something small and reasonable that will
provide shade at a parade.
A breakaway tree, so that when the car loses control, anyway, I don't know. I struggle with that one though, because there isn't a lot of space. So there's some constraints with stuff, but
I understand why you put it in. I just think that could be a decision that maybe the development, when they're making the development, that they could. I wouldn't say that we should discourage it. I don't know that we necessarily have to say anything about it right this moment about it, and we could come up with.
We can talk about it. I mean, there's a lot of utilities in on the east side to put in and compete with the trees, and that's always problematic. So it is coming from staff as a general whole, trying to replace it with a design. But hey, if the city wants to try to put park strip trees back in, my suggestion is that we acquire more right of way and we put in larger park strips.
Yeah, usually you have to have at least a 5-foot park strip, like at a minimum for street trees. They just don't grow very well. They die very quickly. There's a lot of utilities, usually gas and power, run through those, and And I love street trees. If I could, I would put street trees everywhere. There are a lot of difficult things to work with around street trees, and they can be.
Right.
You can work around it, and it would be awesome to work around it. There's some things you'd have to make
Consider.
happen and consider for it.
Kevin, you're hurting my heart.
I am.
Bringing up putting things in between the street and where people walk, because
know.
that was, I still have a hard time giving
You
up
could
on
always
that
do
one.
a 6-foot vinyl
I'm like,
fence.
oh, man.
Let's
I
put a
felt-
fence up, yes. Good plan, Corey.
That one was just near and dear to my heart, the idea of separating the
loved it.
whizzing cars and the people walking on the sidewalks. But I know
Amen.
that the city council disagrees with
Yep.
us on that, so
Amen.
I am gonna just let that one lie.
Yeah, I never commented on the redesign of the front yard of City Hall.
I liked it.
Oh, what I think is interesting is you want to get rid of this north access over here. What's that all about?
Yeah, I don't like that though.
Oh, I don't like that at all.
The city wants to get rid of it and move it and
What?
put it where the gas station is, to avoid the left turn conflicts.
How do
Wait.
you get the gas station?
And
That's
put it
gonna
where
be
the
even
gas
more.
station is.
That's gonna be more.
I thought the gas station was
The
going to
gas
become the
station
next
is farther
museum.
north.
It's even closer to that intersection. What do you mean? I
No,
don't
it
get
moves
it.
it so it's, instead of the competing, it moves it so that they're
No one will
across
be
the
able
street
to.
from each other.
Wait, what?
Oh,
Wait,
across
I'm-
the street from the entrance to the post office.
Yeah.
Across the street from the entrance to the post.
You
I'm
combine the gas
confused.
station entry with the city building entry.
I thought you were talking about the left turn lane to Parish.
No.
You're talking about the left turn lane to the
For City
post
Hall.
office.
Yeah, we could keep the pavement in here and use it as parking, but I think we should eliminate that left-hand turn. And I think we should use 100 East as our front face too. With the parade for the front face for the street, but for the public and the orientation of the public in the park is use all that. Because they want to acquire the gas station and the home on the master plan of the City Hall.
Yeah.
And they want to move the entrance from where it is on here on the north side to be across from the post office. It would take out Randall's gas station. The Randall's gas station's now on the historic register, so I'm
Yeah, people are
recognizing
not
it's on
wanting
the
to do
historic
that.
register. But we still have a left-hand turn movement conflict.
Oh, you can't. Never mind.
Interesting. Where do we go from here, Corey?
Well, I can take some of your ideas and flush them out some more and bring it back. Now, we're scheduled for council to be invited to 6 or 6:30 to, and this is what I talked to Shaylin about, is this is, in my mind, this is balance between keeping them informed so that we don't get 8 months down the road and they come up shocked of some of the ideas. But I think we said, and they agreed, that we would keep them informed. So rather than have a work session line item these issues, I think we could use the 24th to meet with them early before the meeting or make it a part of the meeting, depending on the agenda schedule. It really is irrelevant to what time. But we can talk about what we've talked about. We're thinking some of these 5 principles of ideas. We're thinking of looking at these from still some separation of different types of segments, and you can express the elements of competing interests of residential versus keeping it commercial. You can have a dialogue as saying, what's the tax value? So they start hearing that these are the problem solutions that we're wrestling with, and they can appreciate that and maybe even respond in a helpful way of, yeah, we need to go get that data. Well, then that bumps that out into the future as we go and get the data that you talked about.
The more I think about it, the more I think that that's just really critical. That piece of information may be one of the single biggest things that we need.
And I think you could use the 24th to express that so that the adjustment is in the timeline that planning staff just is a one-person show and couldn't do it all. I'll use that. But I think that's.
Are you looking for a replacement for Cassie?
We do have a,
Oh, you already have one?
yes,
Oh.
yeah. I don't know if it's officially announced yet, but
Well,
yeah,
good.
we have a
We'll wait
replacement.
on
for
that.
We can wait.
And so I think we still use the 24th to talk with the council, this dynamic and these struggles.
Yep.
And early preliminary ideas that are coming about and keeping them informed. So if you're still okay with that, I would go back in and start parametering some of this discussion, trying to add to things, okay, weigh in on this, weigh in on that, in the skeleton, so that we can capture what we've talked about tonight.
What did you guys think? I know, sorry, I don't mean to redrag stuff up, but what did you think about Corey's idea of doing commercial high on just that north end? I was a little conflicted. I liked it conceptually, but I ultimately don't think I would buy off on it. I think I like the idea of keeping that Main Street
Yeah, that's
smaller,
fine.
but
I agree.
Yeah. I was conflicted as well. I didn't have I hadn't decided one way or another.
So
but-
remind me, Corey, did we already carve out the north side of Parish Lane from the Main Street? What, it was part of it before?
yes,
Or
the
is
Dick's
still?
Market
Yeah.
was. It's not now.
We carved that out, we did that before.
No, that's still Gateway. We've changed the Southern Gateway with a whole new community plan,
Yeah,
but it still sits in there as the Page's Gateway. And then all of Dick's Market is the Parish Gateway under the existing plan right now.
oh,
This carves it out of there.
yeah, I like that. Okay.
yeah,
All right,
really great
back
ideas.
off the CH uses.
I really, by the way, I really like under your public space plan, and maybe we do need to come up with another term for it, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think that does have some negative connotations, and I
Triggers.
don't want what's under it to be sort of discounted for that reason, but I love the idea of working with UDOT to get additional crosswalks on Main Street. I think that the one crosswalk that we have on that huge stretch is ridiculously inadequate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll rename that to come up with something in draft.
Public space, public,
Public realm, no. Probably corridor street plan or something.
yeah, I guess something,
Just something like that.
people movers.
People.
I told you I was a Disney girl.
I'm fine
Alright.
with it. So I would take some of this discussion, try to organize it and insert thoughts in the skeleton of to be discussed or something of that nature in a little statement. Invite the planning commission, you are the planning commission, invite the city council to the meeting. I'll work with Shaylin on, is it just before 7 or is it 7 depending, sometime in 7 depending on the workload.
Yeah, as that gets closer, are you guys okay with leaving that one just a little bit flexible? If we've got a really packed agenda, then maybe we do it at 6:30, and if we have a super light agenda, then we can just tee it up at 7.
Right now, the only thing, and I think we'd have to have the applications in today, the only thing is this plan.
Oh, good, so I think 7 o'clock, let's tentatively pencil in 7 then.
Okay.
And invite them to come. Okay, I think that this was a really good start. I'm excited about doing this, I really am.
I appreciate you pulling me out of the vacuum of my insanity for a minute.
Okay.
I'll never say theme again.
Good discussion. All right, continuing on, moving through our item agendas, moving to item number 5, which is the Community Development Director's Report.
There it is, we just know for
Anything
sure
else?
that we're talking about this next meeting.
All right.
Okay.
City Council report?
Dual Creek Place subdivision was approved.
Good. All right, minutes. So we've got 2 sets here. Let's start with the joint City Council Planning Commission work session. So these are the ones at 5:30. We'll do this in traditional fashion, page by page. If you have any comments, give them to me as we go through. So starting with the March 13th minutes for 5:30 on the joint session, page 1, the only thing I noticed was that Thomas Hunt's name is hiked over to the left, so let's put him over with the rest of us.
There's also a random space on line 26. I'm not quite sure why that one's there. Unless that was supposed to be line 25, separating the,
Yeah, Tammy and Kevin, you guys don't line up, do you?
no, well, there's that space.
too.
There's that too.
No.
But then also line 26 is a space that maybe
Oh,
I
I
should have been
see.
moved down and there's a space between city council and planning commission. I don't know.
Got it.
Yeah,
Any other comments on page 1?
nope.
page 2. Page 3, I had only 2 comments. On line 1, Parish Lane, lane should be capitalized. And then this is just a formatting thing. Starting on line 44, it looks like it was, the entire paragraph was indented, but oddly enough, it seems to carry over onto the following pages. From there forward, everything is indented just a little bit, the entire paragraph, so that was just a small formatting tweak. Any other comments on page 3? Page 4, I just caught there was 2 periods on line 22 after property owner. Anything else on page 4? Page 5.
I had a question on, I wasn't at this work session unfortunately, but on line 37, someone responded in the negative. Can we help? Can we help Jamie out?
I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I know. Can we help Jamie out somehow? And
I don't remember. I know I had the same question, Kevin.
There was some quite visual body language
Where?
and some groans.
On,
Line 37.
page 5, line 37, it starts out with someone responded in the negative.
So if I watch it, I should see something?
Is that one
Yeah.
recorded?
It wasn't recorded via video. I think it was just the
Yeah.
audio
It was on the audio.
recording.
Yeah, this is one of those where I get in trouble from time to time, just maybe to clarify to others because it came up in some rumor mills. The city requires me to be AICP certified, and one of the ethics statements that I abide to is to respond to economic and housing needs and push for policy for change to meet the needs of that community. And I've received some feedback of that push being negative, and I just letting you know the reason I brought that up and pushed it is because I'm obligated as a certified planner to encourage and promote policy change for
Good
the
for you.
disadvantaged.
good for you.
So I think you could just say some responded in the negative.
Okay.
So I think there were multiple people that,
But
I-
there was people uncomfortable that I pushed that issue.
I would ask that it be clarified, though, that it was some city council members. I don't
Yeah.
believe that any of the planning commissioners that were in attendance, and I'm not trying to speak for anyone.
I agree,
So
though.
tell me if you feel differently, but I didn't get the sense that any planning commissioners had any pushback on that.
So
yeah,
some-
or you could just take it out.
Or take it out, I'm fine taking it out.
He asked the
Okay.
question.
But there was a method to my madness, and I'm very aware of my role with that AICP to bring those issues up. And that's why I said, okay, this is what I do all the time. And so,
I
I
think
just
it-
received some negative feedback. I just wanted you to know where it came from.
Well, and I think we should keep it in because then it makes my
Great.
next comment make sense. Because I was saying, someone responded to the negative, and then I point out, because you talked about inclusionary zoning and affordable housing. So I actually would say that we could probably add in as affordable housing, or you said something about, you asked us to consider inclusionary zoning, and then you can say at the end, affordable housing. So you could restate that to include something about inclusionary zoning, and then someone responded to the negative, and then I said, but I pointed out there's need for inclusionary zoning with empty nesters especially.
Yeah, you can lighten it up. I mean, people are comfortable lightening it up because, it was a audible in body language of concern. And so I think you could say that the response was, raised some concerns. And then Commissioner Wright pointed out.
I do feel strongly about it saying some council members raised concerns.
Okay.
Does anyone have any strong objections to that? Okay.
So just for my clarification, I've got that part, but as far as Commissioner Wright's comments about,
I guess I'll let Corey decide how he includes that part about inclusionary zoning, because I remember you said that specific word.
I would say council is open to strategies of inclusionary zoning and then some of those units being designated as affordable housing.
Perfect.
Any other corrections or comments on page 5? Page 6?
Yeah, I don't know if it's important, but everywhere else you use people's last names, and so on line
You have to earn your last
Haven't
name.
been here long enough, Thomas. You
All right,
can't
let's
have
go.
it yet.
So 13 and line 13 and
You'd like to be
15.
Commissioner Hunt, would you?
Commissioner Hunt, yeah.
Don't grant him that.
Makes me feel like I'm back in the mission. Hunt.
There is a reference here on line 14. She did not believe that traditional retail would be interested in the area. I assumed that that was attributable to you. But was it someone else? Do you recall?
No, that was Commissioner Thomas, I think.
That was me.
So I had changed it to he in my notes, but I didn't want to, that to be incorrect. Did you believe that traditional retail would not be interested in that area?
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that, Thomas.
You did not believe that traditional retail.
Yeah. Yeah, sure, we'll go with it.
Sure. So on line 10, it's up to 6 residential units per acre, just 1 acre.
And then I had one correction on line 39. The sentence that reads specifically, Chair Heyman clarified that the overlay pushed all of the buildings close to the street. Close, but I want it to read, because I think it more accurately reflects what I said. Chair Heyman asked Commissioner Incy to clarify if his concern was that the overlay pushed all the buildings close to the street. Because that was not my concern. I was making sure that was his. Any other comments on page 6? Page 7. On line 7, I just want to take out the phrase, because if so, she could get on board. Maybe that's exactly what I said, but it's not what I meant. And I don't want that to give the wrong impression. Anything else on page 7?
Yeah, on line 15, is that question mark necessary? I mean, I know that Mr. Snyder asked, but it's a statement, not a question, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then on line 44, this is really just picky, but it's a work session, not a workshop.
Anything else? On line, and anything on 8? Okay, Chair will entertain a motion.
I move to accept the minutes of the Joint City Council Planning Commission work session for Wednesday, March 13th, 2019, as amended.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Let's move on to the last minutes, which are for March 27th at 7 p.m.
Really quickly, Jamie, you did these minutes for the, I think you did an awesome job. I mean, it's sometimes very difficult when you have that many people to get everything down, to get it.
That was a lot of errors.
No. It was not a lot of errors. I think you did those were just minor things, but I think you did an excellent job of getting the tone and the feeling of what was happening and the discussion without, making one thing too heavy. I just think you did a great job, so great job.
Did you have to identify the people just by their voice?
Thank you. I felt it.
As I recall, let's see, this was the joint.
You were there.
Oh, so you're kind of time stamping or a little bit?
No, I just made a little chart about who was speaking,
When?
who was sitting where, and I would say, so-and-so said this. I would just sort of document who was speaking, make notes, I guess.
That's smart.
A lot of work. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. March 27th meeting minutes. Anything on page 1?
Yeah, line 32, Mr. Hanson explained that he formerly worked in Yuma, Arizona.
I was gonna say that too.
Oh.
I wasn't even here. That was my only change.
No.
Any other comments on page 1? Page 2?
I've got one. Becky, what you should say is that on line 47,
Oh, that's what I wanted to say.
yeah, that relaxing the standards. So just add ing to relax, that's all it is.
You know, and I read that, and that sentence doesn't make sense, which makes me think I did say it. However, I just wondered if that, and you know, I didn't go and listen to the minutes, but it says that I felt that relaxing the standards would require more restrictions rather than fewer, and so I wouldn't put it past me.
I actually remember when you said that,
Listen,
I was sort of doing the mental gymnastics in my head,
Okay.
and I thought, he's really smart, because I am not figuring out what he
No.
means by
Yeah.
that,
Ooh, I
and he's
juked
like
ya.
playing
I juked ya.
three-dimensional chess.
I thought he's reached a new level of changing directions mid-sentence.
Okay, well, in that case, that's probably what I said, and the record better reflect my inability to form my thoughts, actually.
What you actually, Logan, to try to give you
I don't know.
some
Yeah,
space,
I would,
some space, you were trying to say that if there was this set here, you may have to increase the standards over here to accomplish
I swear,
something nice.
it actually was brilliant when you said it. I remember like sort of almost grasping what you were trying to get at.
what were you saying, Jamie?
It made sense at the time. I didn't,
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of thought, okay, I see where.
It feels that relaxing the standards
But I
require more
can take it out
restrictions.
of it, like,
That's what being on the planning commission for 6 years is gonna do to you, you know, you're
All right. Anything else on page 2?
No.
Page 3, I had a,
Was present more restrictions, was I
Yeah.
think present?
I had a couple of just minor things here. Starting with line 1, that whole sentence, Chair Heyman is under the impression that the city encouraged buildings to be built close to the street, not, the word not is missing, not to facilitate the construction of a tracks line down Main Street, comma, but rather to disincentivize UDOT from widening the roadway.
Amen.
And line 13, just to make this a little bit more clear, but she does not believe a sweeping change on Main Street is very likely, and just add to pass the city council. And then one little minor thing on line 51, the commissioners agreed with a D. Anything else on page 3? Page 4? Every time
This is where Lisa missed out.
I want you to know, every time I see LUAU, I always think luau, and then I think Hawaii, and then I really want to be somewhere warm. Anything else on page 4?
No.
Page 5. Chair will entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the planning commission minutes of the meeting Wednesday, March 27, 2009, as amended.
I'll second it if you meant 2019.
Did I say 2009? Sorry, 2019. As amended.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right.